I had been feeling unusually exhausted that night, having had a long and stressful day. When I finally climbed into bed, I expected nothing more than a peaceful night's rest. I remember closing my eyes, trying to relax, and soon drifting off into sleep. But instead of a smooth transition into slumber, I found myself in a disorienting state of half-consciousness. I was aware of my surroundings but couldn't move a muscle or make a sound. It felt like I was trapped between sleep and wakefulness, a common precursor to sleep paralysis. The room was eerily quiet, and the darkness seemed to press in on me, amplifying the sense of helplessness. As the initial confusion settled in, I was unaware of the nightmarish experience that was about to unfold. Suddenly, I felt an intense, unsettling pressure on my body. It started as a vague, uncomfortable sensation but quickly intensified into something much more disturbing. It was as though someone was physically holding me down, their grip inescapable. The touch was intrusive, and I could feel the warmth of an unseen presence pressing against me. My mind raced with confusion and fear as the sensation became unmistakably sexual in nature. I was paralyzed, unable to move or cry out, and the knowledge that this was happening while I was helpless made the experience even more terrifying. The line between reality and nightmare blurred as I struggled to understand what was happening, feeling a deep sense of violation and panic. The sensation of being gripped intensified, and my fear reached a crescendo. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and the panic set in as I desperately tried to move or call for help. My mind was screaming, but no sound escaped my lips. Every attempt to shift or break free was met with failure, as if my body was completely under someone else's control. The horror of being unable to move while experiencing such an intimate, intrusive touch was almost too much to bear. The overwhelming sense of dread and helplessness made it feel like I was trapped in a waking nightmare. As the pressure continued, I fought to regain control over my own body, the struggle feeling both excruciating and endless. Gradually, the sensation began to fade, and I started to regain some control over my body. My movements were slow and shaky as if I was emerging from a heavy fog. As the pressure lifted and the grip on me loosened, I could finally move my limbs and breathe more easily. The paralysis released its hold, and I woke up fully, drenched in sweat and trembling. My heart was racing, and I felt a profound sense of relief mixed with lingering fear. The experience left me feeling shaken and confused, trying to piece together what had just happened. As I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't shake the sense of violation and the unsettling feeling that something deeply disturbing had occurred. In the days that followed, the experience left a profound mark on me. Every time I went to bed, I was haunted by the memory of that night. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread associated with sleep, and the fear of another episode of paralysis made it difficult to relax. I found myself lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The psychological impact of feeling so vulnerable and violated was intense. I began to dread falling asleep, worried that the nightmare might return. To cope, I started making changes to my sleep environment and established new bedtime routines in an attempt to feel more secure. But even with these adjustments, the fear lingered, a reminder of the dark and helpless moments I had endured.
Every night follows the same routine. I prepare for bed, brush my teeth, and slip under the covers. The day's events fade away as I sink into the familiar embrace of sleep. The room is dark and silent, a comforting cocoon that wraps around me. My eyelids grow heavy, and soon enough, I drift off, the world around me fading into the background. It starts like any other night, with the comforting darkness pulling me into its depths. But tonight is different. As I fall asleep, I find myself dreaming within a dream. In this second dream, I see myself lying in bed, sleeping peacefully. It's an out-of-body experience, and I watch myself from a distance, feeling an inexplicable sense of unease. The surroundings are eerily similar to my real bedroom, but there's a palpable sense of wrongness. I realize I am in a dream, but something is profoundly unsettling about observing myself in this state. The layers of sleep intertwine, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. The sense of unease quickly turns to agony. The more I observe myself, the more the dream becomes oppressive and suffocating. It feels as though a heavy weight is pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I feel trapped, desperate to escape this nested dream. My sleeping form appears distressed, mirroring the panic building within me. I try to scream, to wake myself up, but no sound escapes my lips. Every attempt to break free only deepens the layers of the dream, intensifying the feeling of helplessness and fear. With each attempt to wake up, I find myself slipping into yet another layer of the dream. It's a never-ending cycle, each layer identical to the last, filled with the same agonizing self-observation. I claw at the boundaries of the dream, trying to tear through the fabric of this surreal nightmare, but I am met with resistance. Panic grips me as I realize I am trapped within these layers, unable to break free. The cyclical nature of the dreams becomes unbearable, each loop adding to my growing dread. The lines between dreams blur, and I am lost in this nightmarish loop, my mind teetering on the edge of insanity. Finally, I am jolted awake, my heart pounding, drenched in sweat. I lie in bed, unsure if I am truly awake or still dreaming. The room looks the same, but I am filled with a lingering sense of dread. I can't shake the feeling of being watched, of the oppressive weight still pressing down on me. The fear of falling back into that endless loop keeps me on edge, making it impossible to find peace. The experience leaves me shaken, the psychological torment lingering long after I have woken up. I can't help but ponder the thin veil between dreams and reality, and the dread of what might await me the next time I close my eyes.
I remember the night my mom went to church and I was left alone at home. It was dark, and the silence felt heavier than usual. The living room window was broken, allowing every little sound from outside to seep in. I could hear the faint rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional bark of a dog. Despite the familiar sounds, an eerie stillness hung in the air, making me feel more alone than ever. The house felt different at night, the shadows longer and the silence deeper. The sense of solitude was almost palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud, piercing whistle coming from the broken window. The sound was sharp and clear, cutting through the night air like a knife. I jumped at the noise, my heart racing. It was a whistle, but not just any whistle. It was deliberate and seemed almost too precise to be random. I hesitated for a moment, my curiosity battling with my fear. I knew I had to check it out. With each step towards the window, my nerves grew tighter. As I approached, the sound seemed to intensify, and I couldn't help but feel that something, or someone, was outside, waiting. I peered through the broken window, straining to see anything in the dim moonlight. The yard was eerily quiet, bathed in an otherworldly glow. Shadows danced across the ground, but there was no sign of movement. The whistle had come from outside, but now all I saw was the stillness of the night. I felt a growing sense of dread as I scanned the area, searching for any hint of what could have caused the sound. The grass was undisturbed, and the trees stood motionless. My heart pounded as I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the wind, but the distinctiveness of that whistle made it hard to believe. I decided to call out, hoping that someone might answer, but the only thing I heard was the echo of my own voice fading into the night. I called out into the darkness, my voice trembling, "Who's there?" The words felt hollow in the still night, swallowed by the silence. There was no response, just the heavy quiet pressing in from every direction. I felt a growing sense of unease as I stood there, peering into the empty yard. The unsettling realization that no one was around to answer my call only deepened my fear. I checked the surroundings again, trying to find any clue or explanation for the whistle. My eyes darted around, but everything remained motionless. The silence grew louder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. The longer I waited, the more the oppressive darkness seemed to close in on me. Eventually, I shut the window and stepped back into the safety of the house, my heart still racing. The unsettling quiet seemed to follow me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the darkness. I tried to rationalize what I had heard, but the distinctness of that whistle and the absence of anyone outside left me with a lingering sense of dread. Every creak of the house and every gust of wind felt amplified, as if the night itself was conspiring against me. I kept glancing towards the window, half expecting the sound to return. The fear of not knowing who, or what, might have been outside stayed with me long after the night passed. I couldn't help but reflect on the eerie encounter, feeling haunted by the unanswered question of who or what had made that chilling whistle. When I was between 7 and 10 years old, my nights were plagued by a recurring and deeply unsettling nightmare. Each night, as I drifted off to sleep, I would find myself in the same horrifying scenario. A woman with long blonde hair would appear in my dreams, guiding me towards a dark, foreboding hole. This was no ordinary hole. It seemed to stretch into an abyss, its edges sharp and treacherous. In the nightmare, I was compelled to walk around the edge of this abyss, unable to stop or turn away. My tiny feet would shuffle along the precipice, the sheer drop just inches away. I would cry out, pleading for help and desperately begging to be pulled away from the edge. The fear was overwhelming, a paralyzing terror that made me feel like I was on the brink of falling into the dark void. Every night, the scene would play out in the same horrifying manner, and the sense of dread and helplessness never seemed to fade. It became a routine part of my childhood, and despite the terror it brought me, it was a recurring nightmare that seemed impossible to escape. Each time I closed my eyes, I was thrust back into the same agonizing dream. The moment the nightmare began, I would find myself being led by the woman with the blonde hair. Her presence was both menacing and enigmatic, her expression cold and indifferent as she guided me toward the edge of the abyss. Once at the hole, the horror of the dream would take hold. I would walk around the edge, my steps hesitant and unsteady. The abyss below seemed to pulse with a dark, malevolent energy, its depths seemingly infinite. I could feel the edge beneath my feet, a thin line separating me from the vast nothingness below. Each step was a struggle, every movement a reminder of the danger that lurked just inches away. The fear was palpable. It felt as though the void itself was reaching out, trying to pull me into its depths. I would sob uncontrollably, my cries for help echoing in the dark emptiness. I begged for someone to rescue me, to pull me away from the edge, but the woman remained silent, watching from the shadows with an unsettling detachment. No matter how hard I tried to escape or wake up, the dream persisted. The loop seemed unending, trapping me in a perpetual state of terror. The sheer helplessness of the situation was suffocating, and it left me feeling utterly drained and frightened by the time I woke up. The nightmare didn't remain confined to my sleep. Its terror seeped into my waking life, manifesting in unsettling ways. During the night, as the dream played out, I would sometimes cry out and beg for help, just as I did in my nightmares. This behavior wasn't just confined to the dream world. It began to affect my actions while I was awake. My parents noticed my distress and were deeply concerned. They would hear me sobbing and pleading in my sleep, but their attempts to wake me were stifled by the doctor's advice. The medical professional had suggested that disturbing me during these episodes might only increase my anxiety, so my parents were instructed to let me be, thinking that it was the best course of action. Despite this well-meaning advice, my parents were confused and worried. They watched helplessly as I cried out and moved restlessly in my sleep. They saw me struggling, my small body writhing and reacting to something they couldn't see. The dissonance between my calm demeanor during the day and the terror-filled nights was troubling, but they trusted the doctor's guidance. For me, it was a confusing and frightening experience. I couldn't understand why I was behaving this way or why I felt so distressed without any clear cause. The nightmare's impact was profound, causing me to wake up feeling exhausted and emotionally drained, unable to shake the residual fear from my dreams. It was a constant source of anxiety, knowing that every night brought the potential for the same terrifying ordeal. The relentless nature of the nightmares took a significant toll on my mental and emotional well-being. Each night, the fear and helplessness I experienced during the dream would linger long after I woke up. The sense of dread from the abyss seemed to follow me throughout the day, casting a shadow over my waking hours. During the day, I found myself haunted by the echoes of the nightmare. The image of the woman with the blonde hair and the endless void would resurface, making it difficult to concentrate or relax. I became increasingly anxious, knowing that nightfall brought with it the possibility of another encounter with the abyss. The fear was pervasive, coloring my perceptions and interactions with others. I started to develop a heightened sense of vigilance, constantly on edge, as if waiting for the nightmare to spill over into reality. The sleepless nights and recurring dreams led to a cycle of exhaustion and anxiety, further exacerbating my fears. My waking life was plagued by the lingering sense of danger and the dread of what awaited me in my sleep. The nightmares began to affect my daily routines and relationships. I became withdrawn and irritable, struggling to explain the source of my anxiety to those around me. The constant state of fear and the psychological strain of the repeated dream left me feeling isolated and deeply unsettled. The inability to escape or understand the source of my terror created a profound sense of helplessness and despair. As the nightmares continued, I began to search for answers, hoping to find some explanation or resolution to the terror that had taken over my nights. I spoke with my parents about the distressing experiences, but they were as puzzled as I was. Despite the doctor's advice to avoid waking me, My parents and I felt that we needed to understand what was causing these nightmares. We sought the help of a therapist who specialized in sleep disorders and childhood trauma. During sessions, I tried to describe the recurring dream and the intense fear it induced. The therapist explored various possibilities, including the impact of stress, anxiety, and any potential sources of trauma in my life. However, the precise cause remained elusive. Over time, the nightmares began to fade, though not without leaving a lasting impact. The vividness of the dreams gradually diminished, and the frequency of the episodes decreased. Although the specific cause of the dreams was never fully uncovered, the process of discussing and exploring the experiences helped to alleviate some of the psychological strain. The journey to understanding the nightmares was long and arduous, but it offered a measure of relief and closure. The memories of those terrifying nights remained with me, but they gradually became less overwhelming. I learned to manage the residual anxiety and found ways to cope with the fear that had once dominated my sleep. The experience left me with a deeper awareness of the power of fear and the importance of addressing unresolved psychological issues.